All right, so Bitcoin, everyone's talking about this Bitcoin market correction.
Yeah.
Prices have been dropping, and there's a lot of chatter about, what's causing it and where it's headed.
Mm-hmm.
So we thought we'd do a little deep dive, look at the data, talk to some experts, and try to make sense of it all.
All those good.
We've got, market analysis, on-chain data expert opinions. So let's see if we can, connect the dots and figure out what's really going on here.
Yeah, definitely a lot to unpack.
Huh.
I think one thing that jumps out at me is just how much of the selling we're seeing is coming from people who bought Bitcoin relatively recently, near its all-time high.
Oh, so the classic buy high, sell low scenario.
Yeah.
Oh, always a tough lesson to learn. But is that really driving the market down? Like, how significant are we talking here?
Yeah, it's pretty significant, actually. Glassnode, which is a blockchain analytics firm, they say that almost 70% of the selling is from people who bought in the last 3 months. And they're calling it a moderate capitulation event, which is basically a bunch of people panicking and selling at a loss.
That makes sense. I mean, if you bought at the peak and you see the price dropping like this, it's got to be pretty nerve-wracking.
Yeah, definitely.
But where does this leave us in terms of the price floor? Like, is there a level where we might see things stabilize?
Well, Glassnode is pointing to $70,000 as a possible bottom.
Okay.
It's a psychological level, but it's also where a lot of those recent buyers would be taking a major hit.
Right.
So they might hold on rather than sell for even less,
Interesting. So 70,000 is a level to watch, but I imagine other experts have different predictions too, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Arthur Hayes, for example, he thinks Bitcoin could test support levels at $78,000 and then $75,000.
Okay.
And he also warns that things could get pretty volatile around that $70,000 to $75,000 range because of a bunch of options contracts expiring around there.
Options contracts? Now, you're going to have to break that down for me. I'm not exactly a Wall Street whiz.
Sure. Yeah. So basically, think of options contracts as like a bet on Bitcoin's price.
Okay.
These contracts give traders the right, but not the obligation to buy or sell at a specific price by a certain date.
Okay.
So if a lot of those contracts expire near a particular level, like let's say $70,000, it can create extra buying or selling pressure, which can lead to, bigger price swings.
I see. So potentially a bumpy ride around those price points.
Yeah, potentially.
Got it. Well, on a more positive note, I've been hearing a lot of talk about whales accumulating Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Is there any truth to that?
Yeah, there's definitely some interesting whale activity happening, while these smaller investors are kind of panicking. Data from CryptoQuant shows a decline in something called the exchange whale ratio on Binance.
Binance being one of the biggest crypto exchanges, right?
It's exactly one of the biggest exchanges. And so this exchange whale ratio is basically tracking the proportion of Bitcoin flowing into Binance from those large holders, the whales.
Okay.
So a declining ratio means that they're easing up on selling, maybe even starting to buy. And historically, this has often preceded price increases.
Oh, that's encouraging. So are these whales seeing something that the panicking short-term holders are missing?
It's possible.
Yeah.
They tend to have more experience and might be better at spotting opportunities in a volatile market.
Right.
And there are also some reports of significant withdrawals from exchanges like Kraken and Coinbase.
Okay.
We're talking billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin being moved.
Billions with a B.
Billions with a B, yeah.
So where's all that Bitcoin going?
It's hard to say for sure, but it could be whales making over-the-counter trades,
Mm-hmm.
Buying and selling directly without using exchanges. Or they might be moving their holdings into cold storage, which is basically offline wallets for extra security.
So either big moves behind the scenes or long-term holding, which both seem like pretty confident moves in the middle of a correction.
Right, exactly. And it's not just about the amount of Bitcoin moving, the coin days destroyed metric, which tracks the activity of older coins that's showing lower highs since December.
Lower highs since December. Okay, so break that down for me. What does that metric actually tell us?
Essentially, it means that people who have held Bitcoin for a long time aren't selling as much.
Okay.
It's a sign that long-term holders, those who weathered previous storms, are confident enough to hold on to their coins, potentially even accumulating more.
Wow, so we've got a mix of signals here. Panicked, short-term sellers potentially accumulating whales, and steady long-term holders. It's almost like different groups are reading this market in completely different ways.
Yeah, exactly. And there's one more important piece to this puzzle, which is the relationship between Bitcoin and traditional markets. And that's going to shed some light on, what might happen next.
Okay, let's talk about that. Okay, so let's talk about that Bitcoin's relationship to the stock market. That feels like a key piece of the puzzle, especially with all the talk about Bitcoin being a safe haven asset.
Yeah, it's a big debate, right? Like, is Bitcoin really digital gold? Is it a safe place to park your money when everything else is crashing? Or is it just another risky asset that follows the ups and downs of the stock market?
Right. If it's just going to tank along with my stocks, why bother with the extra volatility of crypto?
Exactly. And to be honest, the data really suggests that Bitcoin is still acting more like a risk asset. It often moves in the same direction as stocks, not the opposite, like a true safe haven would.
So is the digital gold narrative just hype?
Well, it's complicated.
Yeah.
Some argue that Bitcoin is still young and that its correlation with traditional markets will decrease over time as it matures and gains wider adoption.
Okay.
Others believe that, its inherent volatility will always make it a risk asset, even if it becomes more mainstream.
So no clear answers there. It sounds like we need to be realistic about its limitations for now. But I want to go back to those massive Bitcoin withdrawals for a second. You mentioned whales potentially doing OTC trades or moving their holdings offline. Are there any other theories floating around out there?
Yeah, some speculate that those transfers could involve, institutional investors or even nation states making big moves.
Nation states buying Bitcoin? That sounds pretty wild.
It's not impossible. We've seen countries like El Salvador adopt Bitcoin as legal tender.
Yeah.
Maybe others are quietly accumulating it as part of their reserves.
Huh. It makes you wonder what's going on behind the scenes. But speaking of big players, you mentioned earlier that some people believe wider adoption will help Bitcoin decouple from traditional markets.
Right.
So what would that look like? Like, how much adoption are we talking?
It's hard to say for sure. Some people point to historical examples like gold. Gold used to be much more correlated with stocks before it became a widely accepted store of value. So the argument is that as more people use and hold Bitcoin, its price will be driven more by its own fundamentals, like scarcity and security, rather than by investor sentiment in other markets.
So it's a long game.
It is.
But if that were to happen, how would it change Bitcoin's role in the financial system? What are the broader implications?
Well, that's where things get really interesting. Bitcoin and the underlying blockchain technology has the potential to really revolutionize finance.
Okay.
We're already seeing it disrupt traditional systems in a lot of ways.
Like how? Give me an example.
Well, think about cross-border payments.
Yeah.
Right now, sending money internationally can be slow, expensive, and opaque.
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin can make those transactions faster, cheaper, and more transparent, which is a huge deal for remittances where migrant workers often lose a big chunk of their earnings just sending money back home.
Right.
It's just incredibly inefficient.
Okay, so that's one example. What else?
But Bitcoin also offers an alternative to traditional currencies, especially in countries with unstable economies or restrictive monetary policies.
Right.
We've seen it provide a lifeline for people in places like Venezuela and Argentina, where hyperinflation has just wiped out the value of their savings.
So it's not just about investment then, it's about access and financial freedom for people in really difficult situations.
Absolutely. And then there's the whole world of decentralized finance, or DeFi, which is built on blockchain technology.
Yeah.
DeFi platforms offer lending, borrowing, trading, all the things you do with a bank, but without the need for intermediaries.
So cutting out the middleman entirely.
Yeah, it's pretty radical, and it's really just the beginning. We're still in the early stages of this technology, and who knows what innovations are coming next.
It's exciting, but also a little overwhelming, with all this potential and all this uncertainty. What should our listeners be focusing on right now? What are the key takeaways from all this data?
Well, first, I think it's important to remember that this correction is likely driven by a mix of factors. Short-term panic selling overall market anxiety, and Bitcoin's continued correlation with traditional markets. Second, there are signs that the selling pressure could be easing, especially among whales and those who've held Bitcoin for a long time.
Okay.
This suggests that some big players see value at these lower prices and might be accumulating more.
Right.
And finally, the next few months will be crucial for determining, the market's direction. Will those key support levels hold? Will investor sentiment shift? Will any major news or events, shake things up further?
It sounds like we need to keep a close eye on things. So for our listeners who are trying to navigate this market, what's your advice?
Well, it all comes down to, your individual risk tolerance goals and financial situation. But some general guidance is don't panic. We've seen these corrections before, and Bitcoin has always bounced back, reaching new highs eventually.
Don't panic. That's good advice in any market, really.
Absolutely. And remember that investing in Bitcoin, or anything really, should be part of a diversified portfolio and a long-term strategy. Don't bet the farm on short-term price swings.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into Bitcoin's, market correction from panicked sellers to whale accumulation. It's been quite a ride.
Yeah, it really has. It highlights the complexities, I think, and the contrasting perspectives, within the crypto world.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up, I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier, Bitcoin's potential to disrupt traditional finance. It's a big claim, and I think it'd be helpful to unpack that a little further for our listeners,
Yeah, it is a bold statement, but I believe it's backed by, the technology's potential, and we're already seeing glimpses of that disruption in several key areas.
Okay, so let's break it down. Where are we seeing Bitcoin make waves in the financial system?
Well, one area is cross-border payments. Think about how cumbersome and costly it is to send money internationally using traditional methods.
Right.
Bitcoin offers a much faster, cheaper, and more transparent alternative. And this is especially impactful for remittances, where those high fees can really eat into the hard-earned money that migrant workers send back home.
So it's about empowering individuals and giving them more control over their finances.
Exactly.
What other examples come to mind?
Well, another area is in providing an alternative to traditional currencies, especially in countries with hyperinflation or unstable economies.
Right.
We've seen this play out in places like Venezuela and Argentina, where Bitcoin has become a lifeline for people trying to protect their savings from rapidly depreciating currencies.
It's fascinating how Bitcoin can offer a solution in situations where traditional financial systems have failed.
Right. It's about providing financial access and stability in places that need it most.
Yeah.
And then there's the whole world of decentralized finance, or DeFi, built on blockchain technology.
DeFi, that's the one where you're basically cutting out the banks and financial institutions altogether, right?
Exactly. DeFi platforms offer a range of services like lending, borrowing, and trading, but without the need for those traditional intermediaries.
Yeah, it's a pretty radical shift in how we think about finance.
It is.
So with all this potential and uncertainty surrounding Bitcoin, what's the one key question our listeners should be pondering as they navigate this market?
Well, even though Bitcoin is often touted as a hedge against traditional market instability, how does its current correlation with equities impact your view of its long-term potential? Do you think it can eventually break free from this correlation and establish itself as a true safe haven?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that each investor needs to kind of wrestle with. I think there's no easy answer.
No, there isn't. The reality is Bitcoin is still relatively young. It's been around for a little over a decade, and it's still finding its place within the global financial system.
So it's a journey, not a destination.
Precisely. And its future trajectory will be influenced by numerous factors, adoption rates, regulations, technological advancements, and the ever-evolving global economy.
It sounds like we're in for an exciting, albeit unpredictable ride.
I think that's a safe bet. But for those who embrace the uncertainty and recognize the potential, the journey with Bitcoin can be incredibly rewarding, both intellectually and financially.
Well said. And on that note, we'll leave it to our listeners to contemplate that question and continue their own exploration of this fascinating world of Bitcoin. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure diving into these complex topics with you.
We'll catch you next time on The Deep Dive.